St. John is passionate about entrepreneurship and providing entrepreneurial experiences for our students and the community. This entrepreneurial roundtable series is one of the many initiatives in the business school designed to bring these experiences forward. Each semester, we present a group of entrepreneurs to discuss their startup experiences, and this semester, we are pleased to present our panel this evening focused on bio and medical technology. Toward the end of our discussion, we'd like to encourage you to ask questions of our panel. And we'll have two people in the audience with microphones, so feel free to grab one of them and chime in. Without further delay, let's begin and allow me to introduce our panel. Immediately to my left is Stanton J. Rowe. Stan is Corporate Vice President of Advanced Technology and Chief Scientific Officer at Edwards Life Sciences Corporation. He previously served as President and CEO of Percutaneous Valve Technology Incorporated, a company that he helped found and that was acquired by Edwards in January of 2004. Prior to PVT, Stan was Corporate Vice President for Business Development and Strategic Planning for Datascope Corp., and before that, Vice President of Business Development for Johnson & Johnson's Interventional Systems Division, responsible for the company's coronary stent development efforts. He has been extensively involved in product development, business development throughout his career. Joseph D. Ng. Dr. Ng received his doctorate in biochemistry from the University of California, Riverside in 1992, and did his postdoctoral work studying protein crystal growth and X-ray crystallography of macromolecules at the National Center for Scientific Research in France. As a postdoctoral fellow, Dr. Ng was contracted with the French Space Agency to work with NASA on biological experiments in space, where he was responsible for coordinating scientists all over Europe to conduct biological experiments on the International Space Station. In 1998, Dr. Ng joined the University of Alabama in Huntsville as a faculty member in the Department of Biological Sciences. Peggy Salmon, CEO and board member of Gene Capture, Inc. Ms. Salmon is a serial technology entrepreneur with extensive operational experience in multiple high-tech startups in the field of environmental sensing, wireless communication, and biotech. She has held positions as CEO, President, Director of Operations, Business Strategy, and Sales and Marketing. Ms. Salmon was raised as one of 10 children in Toronto, Canada. She graduated from Bucknell University. She is a mother of 4 children, married to Ralph Petroff, and also serves on the board of iExpress Genes. And finally, Dr. Krishnan Chitter, CTO and President of Gene Capture, Inc., and a co-inventor of the foundational technology used by his company. Dr. Chitter was raised in India. He received a BS in chemical engineering from the Indian Institute of Technology in Bombay. He immigrated to the United States and earned his PhD from Rice University. Dr. Chitter has over 25 years of experience in developing biomaterials and biological sensors. Dr. Chitter is a professor of chemical engineering at UAH, and he is married to Deb Chitter. Please welcome our panelists. I want to thank you all for coming this evening. As you can see, our panelists include 2 experiencing their first startups, one with experiences with several young companies at various stages of growth, and one with considerable experience with both startups and large corporations. In all cases, though, there is a new technology or a new product and a need to take it to market in the challenging world of biotech and medical technology. I will start by asking each of you to give me an overview of your experience in launching new products into the market. Stan, can you give us 5 minutes of your experience and tell us a little bit about the new products and the new markets you've been a part of?
Sure. I actually have a couple of slides. If you could throw those up, maybe we could run through them. There we go. And this is my resume. So I've worked on a lot of interventional cardiology products, including the very first coronary stents, the first drug-eluting stents, and more recently the percutaneous heart valve. These have been revolutionary products, which makes them a whole lot harder than iterating. And hope we can spend some time among our colleagues here talking about the challenges of disruptive technology, because it's very different when you innovate disruptive technology than iterating in an established market. And maybe there's some generic things here, and I'm sure all of us will talk about it. Innovation in biomed, you either today have to improve outcomes, reduce cost, or hopefully both. That is our requirement. And you really have to understand the standard of care. You have to understand market dynamics, not today. Yes, you have to understand today, but you're going to be launching how many years from now? Varies for each of us, I'm sure, but for most of the products I develop, it's probably 5 to 7 years. So I have to think about the dynamics 5 to 7 years from now. That's when I'm launching. That's when I have to think about customers. I have to understand how customers think. I have to understand medical economics. And again, I'm going to fly through these. I did a lot of work recently, of course, in cardiac surgery and understanding how, what their outcomes are, how they think about these outcomes, how they relate them, the world of the cardiac cath lab, understanding the history behind development. Something I'd also encourage all of you to do, which is to understand what's gone before, because that is the context in which your customers think. Again, understanding markets as they exist and markets as you will develop them. And you have to be sophisticated in intellectual property, and I'm sure that'll be a topic of our discussion here as well. Building teams. Building great teams is a huge part of the job, and we'll talk, I'm sure, a good deal about this. Always hard to recognize what a great team looks like. I certainly wouldn't have invested. This guy here looks like he was about 12 years old. I think he did okay. You don't do this by yourself. You're going to need great medical advisors to work with you as colleagues, and you're going to fail a lot. You're going to make a lot of stuff that doesn't work, and you're going to do it for a long time until you finally succeed and make something that is important. You're going to have to raise money. We'll spend a lot of time, I'm sure, talking about that. And with that money, you're going to have to be very frugal and efficient and plan a clinical and regulatory strategy. I raised in the last company $20 million, but after that, we invested another $800 million to bring this to market around the world. That's a big investment. And whether you're raising it from venture capitalists or you're raising it internally, you're competing for key investments. And you pray that those pay off and have big dividends. We all dream about having things published in the New England Journal of Medicine that impact mortality and compete against the standard of care, which is what this does. And I'm going to talk about this, I guess, tomorrow in the sciences school, so if anybody wants to go into some detail, it'll be fun. That's my pitch for the night. And the other thing I want to mention is quality of life. A key standard if you're developing therapeutic agents is not only to understand the clinical effect, but the impact on patients. Quality of life, and again, medical economics, we have to demonstrate cost effectiveness, and it's a whole other area of sophistication as a requirement. And then I always say the one thing you must always remember when you're developing medical products is it's the patients that come first. And if you make decisions that are patient-based, you'll always be squared. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Stan. Appreciate it very much. Joe, can you give us a 5-minute overview of your company, what it does, the product, the customer, and where it stands now?
So I Express Genes, I don't have any slides, unfortunately, but I'll describe it as best I can. I Express Genes is a bioengineering company, and what we do is we take and synthesize artificial genes which means taking letters of the genetic code and putting them together, and finally taking them to a gene product where they could be useful for biotech applications. And I say this as an engineering part because we do fabricate, and we use this word loosely because we make things from scratch. We take things that we learn about nature, about biology and chemistry, and we try to artificially design and build an architecture which can facilitate bioprocesses. And these bioprocesses can facilitate human health applications, defense, energy. And so the uniqueness about this company is that it's derived from an academic setting. And this is kind of what's unique, and maybe a good part of discussion today is that being trained as an academician as your whole career, and a mindset that you do things for free, and you don't get paid for it, and all of a sudden you have to make money and make a profit. And so the hurdle of going into this company mindset is that you're trained as an academician, and decades ago, you always thought that it's evil to be profitable, and it was considered to be, prostituting your knowledge, and that's how we were viewed as. And this was about 20, 25 years ago, and it wasn't that long. And then I think as we start progressing and with fiscal challenges, there seems to be more acceptability for universities, for the academic community, to accept for-profit types of activities. And iExpress Gene is a UH company. It's a partial owner, and we were privileged to have an embracement from the university to allow us to start up a company. And in so doing, what we did is we took what we learned in research and what we learned in biology and tried to put on in applications. So it's very different from academic research because in terms of funding, we're in a university environment. You apply for grant proposals, either from government funding, from contracts, and you get your funding and you do your work, you do your best you can, especially from government funding agencies like the National Institute of Health, National Science Foundation, and so forth. And what prompted us to really go into the for-profit zone is that we were asking our questions as we were going through research development. What would it take to really make a difference to produce a technology that can be useful within our lifetime? And I was thinking 10 years or less. I wasn't even thinking, very, very long extent of time. So if you were very good as an academician, if you were very good as a professor, you could apply for these grants and you could win an NSF grant, for example, NIH, and you probably get a couple of $100,000 for a grant. And if you're really good, maybe you get about $300,000 per grant. That would last you through about 3 years. Right now, maybe for those of you, $300,000 may sound like a lot of money, but in research, it's actually very, very little. And that kind of gets you some materials, maybe fund a student or two, and that will, get you by progressively going through maybe in 2 or 3 years, and still, you get a couple of published papers at best, but still, you're very, very far from achieving your goal and trying to get some application out. And so I did the math, and I said, well, how much would it really take to get us where we want to be in terms of having some serious research and development, get something applicable? And I have the number 10 years or less. Maybe we were in a space town, I thought about Kennedy, about sending to the moon and back in 10 years or less. This seems to be a nice number. And I did the math backwards. I said, well, what would it take? It would take this much amount of materials, this many number of people, and within this time, the amount actually added about, order of magnitude greater. And I said, well, if I was a really good academician and if I got all these grant funding, it would not have been sufficient. So that's what motivated me to go into for-profit. And to this stage, because of physical challenges and so forth, this made sense. And so we decided to take what we've known and try to go into the business in which we will provide services and build instrumentation. And in the meantime, trying to use research and development and build value in what we're doing. So the things that are different now is that you're no longer dealing with government money, not dealing with NIH or NSF, because if you don't succeed with government agency money, the worst thing that could happen to you is that you could be embarrassed in front of your peers, you don't publish papers and so forth. But going into a company, you're dealing with someone else's money, personal money, maybe even perhaps someone's life saving, and you got to return that money. And not only return it, but you got to return it several folds back. So that's a new pressure, and it's a big pressure, and it gets you really on your toes and going. So our company has been started based on, was motivated to start in that direction, and right now, like I said, it's a bioengineering company. We build tools, we provide services in fabricating biological molecules for biotech applications.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Peggy, you're up next. So.
Well, I come from a business background, not the university background, so I've always thought profit was a good word. And because in a lot of ways, especially in high tech, and I've had my career in high technology, you need profit so that you can fuel R&D for new products. So you really are always challenged to do that. But I would say in terms of my background, and specifically at Gene Capture with Krishnan as co-founder, you know, there's just so many things that go wrong when you're trying to start a business. So I'd say the first big lesson I had is that you've got to work with people who are just not overwhelmed by a negative response, a setback. You have to have this, we're going to make it happen, personality and attitude to go into this. And so I'd say leading up to Gene Capture, I had experience with a company called ADS Environmental Services, which was founded here in Huntsville. And we didn't raise any money in that company. We bootstrapped it from the garage to a worldwide leader, 55 offices in 12 different countries. And it is currently, it has been acquired a couple of times. It's currently trading on the New York Stock Exchange and has a lot of long-term value. So that's kind of a great example of how a group of people got together and built a business that became a leader, but it was very high tech, it was very new concept in environmental surveillance. And then I got involved in wireless technology, and for that company, kind of like Stan, what you were saying, we needed a lot of capital to accomplish what we were trying to do. And we raised venture capital, strategic venture capital from companies like Sony and Siemens and IBM, and that was also a Huntsville project. And a very complicated project because of the FCC requirements. But that is a company that is also on its own now. Like we've licensed off some of the commercial aspects earlier, but a very interesting technology. And then I was asked to be on the board of iExpress Genes, and during that time, Joe introduced me to Krishnan, who had a neat idea and was looking for possibly a way to commercialize it. So at Gene Capture, we have a technology that is, really, this couldn't have happened 10 years ago, but a technology that will allow us to identify the source of a pathogen very quickly and very inexpensively. So our mission is to build a portable, inexpensive infection detection medical device. We have it working in the lab right now. We've got a prototype underway. And so we're funding our company through some competitive grants that we won and angel investment. So I've looked at all the options in terms of fundraising. And the status of our company right now is there's 6 of us working on it. We've got some of us doing entirely sweat equity. We're very low burn rate. We're trying to survive through this developmental period. And we expect by the end of this year to have a working prototype that we can use to start strategic discussions with other companies. So I'd say number 1, you need a team that you completely trust, and that you have this, unity of vision about what you're trying to go after and this make it happen approach.
Thank you, Peggy. And Krishna, can you tell us a little bit about your customer and your product?
Yeah, I'll begin with what Peggy said. We have a specific mission. We want to develop something which will allow us to get answers about what the pathogen is quickly. But let me kind of rewind the tape a little bit and sort of go back to 1999 and 2002, 2 key dates. One is In 1999, I took a sabbatical at Research Genetics. There was a company over in the Parkway. Some of you know Jim Hudson started a company. And he was kind enough to allow me to come and essentially do what I want at the company. And that really, I mean, I was interested in biotech, but the opportunity to work in a company that is selling kits, interested in research and all that was just an amazing experience. And 2 years later, we landed up publishing a paper on looking at endothelial cell and gene expression and so forth. And that turned out to be my most cited paper, actually, which is fascinating. So that's 1999, 2000, I came back to the campus. And in 2002, my daughter was born. She was a preemie. She was in a NICU for about 3 weeks. And the first day, the physician looked at an X-ray and said, it looks like there is some shadow on the X-ray. I think she has pneumonia, so let's give her some antibiotics. And it's like, wow, a preemie baby giving antibiotics, and they don't know what's going on. This is the current state of medicine. And so 3 days later, or approximately 3 days later, the lab culture came back and said, no pneumonia, forget it, stop the antibiotics. So it's like, this is a little bizarre. I mean, if in fact, if it exists at time 0, why can't we see it? So I'm trained as an engineer, so the thought process was, is there a way to look for that source at time 0 as opposed to waiting to make for several days before finding out what it might be. So anyways, to make a long story short, we sort of worked on the problem, as it were, and came up with a novel way of looking for that source in blood samples quickly. And then to continue with the story, we got a patent, and then of course, as I think Joe Ing said, I'm trained as a university professor academic, so it's like, what do we do next? And so, as far as the business is concerned, I'm a relative rookie compared to the panel, actually. So it's like, what do I do next? And I was fortunate enough, I knew Joe for a long time, and then I met Peggy. And that really got us started on a journey in terms of what do we do with this technology? What issues about markets? What are some issues, business aspects of it? What might investors be looking for? How do you grow a company? How do you form a company and so forth? So it's been an incredible journey for me personally, and it's exciting. And we are about, as Peggy said, to get a prototype. And we hope to have a product which will demonstrate a relatively quick way of detecting infections after getting a sample from a patient. So, and I think it's Stanton Rose said, we keep in mind, what we want to do is to really improve the ability of the healthcare professional and physician to provide the right information about the patient quickly, and so that we'll have the appropriate outcome for the patient. So it's been exciting.
Thanks, Krishna. Let me start with kind of an industry overview question. And Stan, I'm going to direct this to you and let you start and tell us a little bit about your perspective of the biotech and medical tech industries. So what I really want to know is a little bit about how you can describe those industries and the unique sets of challenges that are present in those industries as you think about product development and you think about entrepreneurship.
In other words, defining the problem, is that the question?
Yep.
I think to be a great entrepreneur, you have to be a nihilist at some level. I sit in, I go to a lot of medical meetings. I probably go to, I think last year I went to 16 medical meetings. Okay, you probably don't know a doctor who went to that many. And they're all cardiovascular, right? And so I see live cases, I'm talking with physicians I've known for years. But when I look at a lot of these procedures, I have to look at them and go, really? Really? Is that the only way you can do that? And so having, what physicians are taught to do is do it this way or the patient might die. There's one way to do it right. Or maybe you have a range of selection, but it's a pretty small box. Creativity and medicine are not two things that are normally compatible. Okay? And so when you're taught that way, the idea of doing something radically different becomes really challenging. And So when you lay fresh eyes on these opportunities and you go, really, is that the best we can do? And again, the example here, and we'll talk more about it, but you know, the way we replace heart valves has always been open heart surgery. You make a 8-inch incision in your chest, take a bone saw your sternum open, take a retractor, open your chest up, put you on cardiopulmonary bypass, stop breathing, and then you can start surgery to repair your heart valves. And you look at that and go, really? This is okay for 80-year-olds? This is okay for 70-year-olds? Can't we do better? So when you focus on those and you make that your mission, I mean, I think that's where huge value is created. But you can't be naive about it. You have to understand the resources it takes, the time it takes. You have to have a great idea, and you have to test it. But the source of those comes from many. And the other thing I should say, so I've got on my campus about 650 engineers. We have about 3,000 people on our campus. And I run an advanced technology group that's about 140 people. And we have about 5 active projects going on at one time and spend about, I don't know, $35 million a year developing these things. And there are things that we've vetted. We've taken them through early feasibility, and then we invest in them. And as they go through milestones, we continue to invest. But I think even with those kind of resources and incredible capabilities, we look to the outside to always say, does somebody else have a better idea? And not just to look internally, because you may not have the best idea. So being open to that and to challenge that and say, are we competitive today, is really critical to assessing those ideas.
Does anybody else want to comment on that?
I'll add a comment. If you look from an investor's perspective, the biotech industry right now has 2 marks against it. And one is that it takes a lot of time to go from early biotech to a product. And that's something that I'd say we're really seeing some changes to that, especially with the Hudson Alpha collaborative effort. But the other is that there's this concern about biotech. You know, is it ethical? Is it changing things? And so those are the 2, I'd say, knocks against biotech from an investor. But the positive is there have been so many new discoveries and developments that it is now not that hard to put together a product with very little new capital. And so that really is opening up a lot of parts of this industry. And I agree with Stan completely on the medical side. That you sometimes sit back and go, it's amazing that is as far as this technology has come on some of these applications. But for an investor looking at this medical device world, the 2 knocks against it are it's slow moving. It's hard to go from product idea all the way through FDA clearance to a product and getting the market to adopt it. And there is this uncertainty. What if it's a great idea and the data's good, but for some reason the FDA doesn't accept it? So you've got those 2 marks against it. But what's going for it in medical devices, and Stan, some of your products are showing it, is there is a hunger for improvement and a hunger for quality. So I'd say from a macro perspective, that's what I see in those 2 markets.
Okay, thank you. Let me follow up with Krishnan here. So Krishnan, talk a little bit about the time dimension. I mean, you and Joe are faculty members here at UAH. You talk about the notion of spending a lot of time thinking about these things, messing around with them in our labs here, and so forth. So talk a little bit about that time dimension, what it means to go from being a faculty member to getting that device ready for commercialization.
Well, I think the first thing is to make sure that we have a good team, essentially. I mean, I'm not doing it all by myself. So I'm fortunate enough that we have a great team. And so when I'm not doing something, there's somebody else who's doing something creative. So that's one. And yeah, I mean, it's exhilarating and stuff. So there are a lot of evenings and weekends I'm doing something. I'm in the lab out of Hudson Alpha doing this stuff. So yeah, it's I mean, it's a lot of work. But it's exhilarating because we have this vision, we have this idea that we're going to change the way diagnostics is done. So that's what keeps driving me. And so we're figuring out a way to get to that goal somehow through what I can do, through what my team members can do, through what we pick up when we talk to people, for example. So it continues to be exhilarating.
Okay, great. And Joe, tell us a little bit about your discovery process and how that led you to your formation of your company.
Well, my primary research is really looking at bugs. And I mean, really little things. These are microbial organisms that live beneath in the bowels of the earth, coming out in hyperthermal vents. And these are the ones that are spouting very, very hot. And what is interesting about these is that you have organisms that can live in temperatures of boiling water or at pHs of Drano, and so these are very, very extreme conditions. And we thought that by looking at these organisms, rather than just getting some very good publications out of it, a lot of the proteins, a lot of their genetic materials, their products can be useful for applications. So for example, many laundry detergents, shampoo, contact lenses, a lot of household products can be improved if you put a lot of these enzymes, a lot of these proteins that come from these types of organisms. And even though they are used to being active in harsh conditions, they can be useful in household conditions where you want to do a hot or cold laundry wash, or you want to break down proteins in your contact lenses. And so this was how basic research was trying, how I turned basic research into something of more applications. Now, getting that transition of getting it to the market, and that becomes quite challenging, especially for someone who's been trained in an academic environment all his life. And this is where I agree wholeheartedly with Krishnan that this is where the team comes in. I think the very critical things, you got to get the right people on board. And I can tell you as an academician, there's this kind of this propensity to try to portray yourself as being very, very smart, intellectual, right? And that could work against you, because then you could not communicate properly to the people outside your field. And what I just described to you about the usage of enzymes, supposedly I started giving big words like the carbohydratase is cleaving the endonucleases, 5535, and that is the scientist and academic is very easy to fall into that trap. Now, getting into the market, you can't talk like that. And you gotta speak in a language where people will understand, and it's gotta sell. And it's gotta sell literally, because you want people to pay money for your product. And I think having people to work with you, to have skill sets, and to recognize yourself that you don't know everything, and that you have a whole diversity of things that can carry things to market, things that looking at budget values, how technology transfer, law patents, things like that comes into mind. So having all this right combinations is the key, really, to take ideas, no matter how well or how intellectual it may sound, to get to something practical, to sales.
How long did that journey take to get there, Krishna and Joe? I mean, how long did it take you to think about just what you said? I've got to form the right team. How long did that take you?
I'm trying to think, maybe a year or so. I don't know the right one, but I want to go back to a couple of things. I want to talk about three things. One is the university environment and how supportive it has been, because certainly if the university is not supportive, then it would be impossible to try to do this. So that has been, extraordinary in a lot of ways. And I would mention, certainly I've been part of the teaching in your class, for example. We've been talking to your students and talking to other people on the campus who have experience in business and entrepreneurship and so on. And second is Hudson Alpha itself, in terms of the institute and the companies at Hudson Alpha that have been extraordinarily helpful in identifying solutions, problems, team members, and so forth. And third, the Huntsville environment in general. I mean, biotech may not be that big compared to defense and stuff, but it's growing, and there are people who want to see it grow, and who will give you their time and in some cases funding also. So I think, certainly there's a lot of support, university, Hudson Alpha, community, for trying something. And I think that's what really keeps us going, because we know we'll keep trying, and there are several people we can call on for help or advice and so forth.
Did you ever consider just licensing your technology, or did you always want to own and move the company forward?
I think at this stage, I don't want to rule out anything, but for the most part, we have a specific objective in mind in terms of developing a prototype and so forth. One never says never do anything, but there may be areas, parts of certain things we may be able to license to somebody else, maybe. But I think Peggy may have a better perspective on what it may be a better strategy, for example. We've talked about it. And it might happen. It's difficult to predict.
So maybe we ought to talk about stages of value creation, because that's a key element in entrepreneurship, right? And that is, not only working your way through feasibility, improve the feasibility, but validating your products and testing them and then taking them into clinic. There are all these phases where value is created, and there may be people that want to license early, right? And that means cheap, because they'll be assuming more of the risk. Whereas the more you validate your products, your procedure, the more value you create and the more they're worth. So as an entrepreneur, your job is to take it up the value curve as high as you can, where the risk is reasonable before you sell it. And that varies. It varies by the product, but it's something you have to be absolutely aware of. When I sold my company to Edwards, the company I work for now, we had done a total of 14 patients. 14. Doesn't sound like much, but again, proving a revolutionary procedure that worked, that nobody thought would ever work. Okay, that was enough validation for them because it was so disruptive. They needed it. Okay? But for many companies, it may be thousands of patients before they're up the value curve and somebody really finds them attractive. Just one other quick thing about this is, remember, if we're an entrepreneur, we work for a board of directors. And the board of directors has one thing in mind, and that is to make money on the part of the shareholders. That's their fiduciary responsibility, right? So let's say I have to do thousands of patients to create value. That means I need to raise $200 million to do that, versus a company that has to do, let's say, 20 patients, and it costs them $20 million. Those two groups may earn the same amount of money for their shareholders, because the guy who's done 2,000 may sell his company for $1 billion, and the guy who's only done 20 patients may sell his company for $150 million, but those may be equivalent returns to the shareholders because of all the dilution. Those are some of the business strategies you have to think of in this value creation.
Yeah, Joe.
I think this value topic is a very great point, and let me touch on that and answering your previous question about how long and the people it takes at the same time. When I started at UAH, when we started even thinking about incorporating the company, the first office I went to at UAH was the Office of Technology Transfer. At that time, it was Bill Gapping's. And one of the first questions that came to mind is that what is the value of your goods, your products, and your company? And that's actually a very hard question, because from my personal point of view, you say, wow, my stuff is a lot of value. And what is high value to me may not be of high value to others. And that was the first lesson I had to learn, is how do you quantitatively determine this value? And of course, to raise money, you have to know this number. And so there, I had to get a lot of help. And I went actually to your class. You've helped tremendously thereafter. You had a class that actually evaluated a business plan and evaluated what's the value of the goods and so forth. And depending on who did it, the value was up to about several $1 million, which I was pleased. I said, wow, that's great. out to $50. And I realized that the value it could be very, very variable. And depending on who looks at it, what is the demand, and that's why I started learning about the demand issue. And so raising money now, having established this value, you need a lot of people to help you out. People like yourself, your class, and being in a university environment, I gotta say it was very, very helpful because starting a company, you're very limited with funds. So you get a lot of exercises with classes, with students working on business plans and so forth, so you kind of get an idea of this value. And to this day, we're still wrestling with this question: what is the value of our company? What is the value of our goods? What can the market bear? That's another word I've learned real quick. Is your value is whoever will put up the money for it.
Yeah, it is always what the market will bear, right? So in the end, it's about figuring out how you match up to that market, in that market space. Let me ask Peggy a question. You're the CEO of Gene Capture, a board member on iExpress Genetics, or genes. And so talk a little bit about your role and how you, not from the scientific side, but from the business side, kind of manage that process and work with both organizations, and what role that you bring to generate some of that value.
Okay, well, I started out as a board member with iExpress Genes first, and so while I've always been involved in technology and business technology, I didn't have a strong background in genetics or in protein or protein crystallization. So the first thing was to learn more about that. But that was in some ways very helpful as a board member to not have that deep, profound knowledge, because I could ask questions to Joe like, why is that important? Just get through all the clutter. Who would want that? Who would buy it? So that was very helpful in developing the business plan. And in the early stages, what we were working on was how could we turn these microbes, thermophilic microbes, and their advantages into a business plan that is meaningful. So real straightforward questions, I'd say, is how it started. When you go through business school, there's a lot of heavy terms, and it's very easy to get confused, but the bottom line in business is you should have a very clear path to where you're going. So I think that was helpful to me, to be able to ask those questions and really validate a business plan by being able to ask potential customers, is this something that is meaningful for you? Now, at Gene Capture, once we looked at all the possible applications for a quick capture of a genetic signature, we decided pretty early on that human infection detection was a real home run market and that it was worth going after. And we validated that business plan by talking to a lot of physicians and talking to hospitals. And that one was a little more obvious because we've all gone to the doctor's office, or we know someone who has, and they say, you're sick, but we don't know what it is. So we all have a feel for the need that's there. But I think the discipline of a business plan is the real answer to your question. Forcing yourself to write a plan and believing in it, having others test it and critique it, that's how you whittle down the big question, which is, do we have something that somebody else needs?
Were there any challenges that were present in that were different than some of the other startups?
I think for me, the challenge probably was learning about the industry. So I took a class at UAH in genetics, and I did a couple of online courses that were offered at the time by other schools. UCLA was offering a very good one. So part of it was me trying to understand this better, and especially from a business standpoint, understanding the law that's associated with genetic businesses and genetic applications, and then the intellectual property, which is very different from wireless technology, which is much more understood. There's still a lot of questions right now about what is patentable in the genetic side. So those were two challenges that I had.
So the one thing we're not talking about here that's probably also relevant is the topic of milestones, right? Because when you talk about value creation, you talk about this value curve, you really have to talk about milestones. And it should be part of your business plan, but to say, how, in what parcels am I going to achieve this goal? What are the key milestones, and how do I measure them? Because anybody who's investing in you is also going to want to know those And they're key to this value creation. I don't know how much this audience knows about how VCs work, but you know, you're going to want to do a round of funding, and then you're ideally we're going to step up your valuation by having accomplished key milestones. And that's good for all your shareholders because the increased valuation reduces the dilution that occurs to the original shareholders, and especially founders are interested in that. So those milestones become critical, and yet I can tell you a lot of companies fail because they don't have enough money to get through their milestones. So getting enough funding so that, gee, I'm going to run into problems, I have to adapt, I have to problem solve. Things are not always as linear as you would like in product development. In fact, if they are ever going great, it means something's about to fall out from under you. So you have to be very adaptive, and you have to be ready for all of those issues and having enough runway to give you time to solve the problems, to go on and then, you know, say, I've accomplished this milestone, I've created this value, and now I'm ready for additional funding, is a key element to this entrepreneurial process.
Krishnan, you wanted to make a comment?
I was just going to say, you know, I knew about what milestone meant, but never really thought about it until we really started it. And I've now recognized how important that is, really. You can't simply say, I have this technology, we can solve 50 different problems. No, you need to be specific. You need to say how you're going to get there, how long you think it's going to get there, how much money it will take to get there, so on and so forth, and all that. So I think that was an amazing education for me in terms of understanding that needs to happen. And I think I'll add something to what Peggy said earlier. There's really, I mean, before I met Peggy, I mentioned, you know, I wrote a business plan for the Alabama Launchpad, I think 2 or 3 times, crashed and burned, literally. And one of the times I wrote the business plan, I even made a comment at the end of it saying, this is terrible, please don't review it. Because it was terrible, I recognized it. But the thing is, I said, I need to do this somehow. And so some of you might have heard about it, in 2010, after I met Peggy, my education started from approximately the baseline and just took off in that time that we started working on the business plan. And then in April of 2010, we actually won the first prize. But I think it's a testament to the different skill sets. I knew about some of the technology, what it could do, and then the focus that was required, precisely what we're going to do, how long is it going to take, how much money it's going to take. All that, when we put together, we could make a compelling story. And that is just a testament to the fact that multiple skill sets were brought to bear on the problem.
Okay, thanks. Now, I want to kind of switch gears just a little bit, and I'm going to ask Stan to kind of comment on this. Stan, they're talking about their startup experiences, but can you talk a little bit to the innovation process and how that works? Because you mentioned milestones, and you bring up the notion of a process that's in place and specifically at larger organizations. So can you talk a little bit about that as well and tell us about it?
So, you know, I think as much as you think about innovation as this creative process, any effective startup has a very defined process. And I would say good innovation requires a great process. Great processes can accommodate those problem solvings. It can accommodate challenges that occur unexpectedly. But you have to have a very defined process. And we have that internally at Edwards. We have that even in the startup we have, which is to really think about what is feasibility. I'm surprised, I mean, you know, part of my job today is evaluating external technologies. And I meet with probably 50 startups a year. And I sit down with them, and in the first 5 minutes, I can figure out whether they've got their act together. It's pretty transparent. It's pretty amazing how many people either haven't thought about the problem they're trying to solve or haven't thought about the process by which they're going to address maybe what is an important need. So Going through early feasibility, absolutely critical. And then, again, really planning your business for the future is the other part of that, which is, how am I going to take this through a regulatory cycle? What are the key questions they're going to ask? What does the hospital administrator want? Who is this buyer? What are they thinking? So you're going to have customers at so many different levels that you have to anticipate the needs of each one of those customers and prepare answers for them. From the regulators, how do I know it's safe? Okay, how do I know how to get into first demand? From the physicians, what is it they want to see? What proof of efficacy? What proof of safety? Medical economics for the hospitals. I mean, each one of those you have to anticipate. That is that process. It's really defining what all of these customers require of you and planning out the process of answering each one of them in a very concise and consistent and efficient manner.
So you're meeting with these inventors one a week, one group a week or something like that. I mean, they're obviously critical to your pipeline, right? I mean, they're critical at least to the thought process of your pipeline. Comment on that a little bit, if you would, please.
Well, again, I think the worst enemy of innovation is pride. The day that you think you got it all together is probably the day you're going to take a hard fall. And I see companies out there. I've been with companies that had a bit too much pride. We're the big guys. We got it all together. And I think only the paranoid survive in business. And you really need to have a healthy dose of it that tomorrow your competition's going to come in. And so I think always look into the outside, not only to benchmark what you're doing, but to know, and you may not have the best idea. If you don't have the best idea, you ought to go buy it. And that's the way big companies operate. Unfortunately, a lot of big companies don't do effective innovation, and so they have to buy it. That's good for startups. It's not necessarily good for big companies, and it's a problem that has to be solved.
So is there anything that Joe and Krishnan and Peggy should be thinking about if they want to be attractive to these larger organizations?
See, I had the wonderful benefit as running a startup of having been on the other side of the table. I had run business development and acquired millions and millions of dollars worth of companies over the years. So I knew what big companies were interested in. And that was a huge benefit to me, as I didn't have to work that hard to figure out what the other guy was thinking across the table. What did they want to see? But it's hard for most startups, and especially more challenging when you have an academic background and you may be a great chief scientist, but you may not be the CEO that the big company wants to see. And remember, in biotech, like every other founding company, a big company walks in, and what are they buying first? It's the same answer pertains to VCs, by the way. They're buying a team. They're buying a team with a good idea. But they're buying a team because if I buy the technology and the people dispersed that know how to use it, that invented it, that lived with it for years, I've lost probably 90% of the value. So having this great team is of huge value, right? So as an entrepreneur, this team is of huge value. This team that accomplishes the milestones and that really understands the technology is the value. So we assess those. We assess those. VCs assess them. They look at you and go, neat idea, probably not the guy who can take this to the end, right? And that happens a tremendous amount of the time. So venture capitalists are interested in management and the idea. And big companies, absolutely the same. What do I want to acquire? I want to acquire a great team that can struggle through adversity and succeed at the end.
Peggy, comment a little bit on team building and relationships. And now you have two of your partners surrounding you right there, and Krishnan and Joe have already talked a little bit about teams, but talk about team building and relationships, particularly within our community. There are opportunities to work with people in the community, and how does that work? What's your process for that?
So I'd say process for team building, a lot of it starts with bringing in new employees. So I think if we go back to one step back to the founder level, I mentioned before, you've got to have this terrific trust between the players. You don't ever want to feel that you're not working for the same goal or that there's some competition in the team. But if you've got that piece of it covered, then it's bringing the team together. And like Krishnan said, we're looking for skill sets. Everybody has gaps in their skill sets. That's okay as long as you've got your circle filled when you make it all the way around. And I think a lot of this has to do with the environment of the leadership, because you asked earlier about innovation, which is a critical part of team building. And Joe, you said you got to be humble and think that we don't always have all the ideas, but very often that idea comes from the team. And if you tell your team, we've got this challenge, we think there's an answer, somebody in this room is going to come up with the answer, and we think it might be you, that person will very often rise to the challenge, as opposed to leadership that just says, do your job, fill out the forms, hand it in, and move on. So I think good team building starts with good leadership. And then I think the interviewing process is, it's risky. It is a risky process. We spend a lot of time meeting with and talking to new employees that we're bringing into our team. You specifically talked about Huntsville. I think we're lucky in Huntsville that there is a pretty generous spirit between business leaders and entrepreneurs that are already in business offering to help others. If you look at the philosophy of Jim Hudson and the collaborative philosophy, that is so helpful. It's really a pretty friendly environment here. And being in business at any level, but certainly at the startup level, it is an unforgiving landscape, and you do need some friends around to help you out. I have really very few disappointments in terms of asking people for help and not getting it.
Joe, do you have anything that you'd like to add to that?
Well, I think a lot of parts about business, people think it's about making profits and making money. I think a good part of it is relationships. And relationships among your working members, relationships within the company, and also relationships in your community. This becomes very, very important. When we started getting into the business and we got to know more people in the community, they become very intricate in your success. It's kind of like those old Sesame Street, who are the people in your neighborhood. There's the postman, there's the banker, and I felt like I was in Sesame Street meeting all these little Muppets when we started, because I did get to meet my banker, I got to meet the post office man, very close. I got to meet some of the politicians and the mayors and so forth. And this whole relationship goes beyond just working with employees, working with people we work with, but it goes out the whole community. I think the whole success is really working as a group, and that feeds on itself. Economic developments and these concepts.
Okay, great. Krishnan, do you want to add some thoughts?
No, I think Peggy really summarized that in terms of, and maybe I'll just add to that, we don't have the not invented here syndrome when we're sitting and looking at solutions. We don't say, no, our idea is the best, this is what we're going to implement, whatever. We're going to say, no, is there another idea? And can we, if you have the funding, can we buy it if you need to adapt it? So we're not proud in that sense. We have a technology, we understand and so forth. But there is something out there, and we have done that. So,
in fact, I'll just add an example there. In the last year at Gene Capture, we made a very strategic decision to go outside the company and hire an engineering team that already existed as an engineering company to build a prototype for us. And we did that because we could buy a team as opposed to buying one or two engineers and bringing them on our staff. And the concept of having a team to develop a prototype was very important to the solution.
Okay, I'd like to switch gears just a little bit. We've talked about the team part, but what about the funding side of this? All right, it takes money to go out and buy an engineering team. It takes money in product development. And I'd like to get your perspectives as you compare startup businesses with established businesses, and Stan, you might have some thoughts here on the established business side.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll just throw in one comment about the kind of the internal, how you build a team is, well, my wife worked for a great company called Perclose years ago, and I was just so impressed with them. Highly motivated. These guys worked hard. They played hard. They worked as a team. When they argued respectfully. They were really amazing guys. And I was sitting down and I had a beer with the CEO, and I said, Hank, God, what a great team you have. I said, how do you hire these guys? What is your hiring philosophy? And he said, no assholes. You know, and I thought about that for years, and I thought, you know, there are these guys you've met who are disruptive, right? And basically when you're building a team, the character of the people you're hiring, and we're not talking about that so much, but it's critical here, right? It's one thing to have technical expertise, but if that technical expertise comes with somebody who doesn't communicate, doesn't get along, who always has a negative attitude, I don't need it, right? My number one criteria today is no assholes. And it's, you guys know, I mean, especially the smaller the team, the less you can tolerate that, right? Secondly, if you're the smartest guy in the room, you fail. Your job is to hire a bunch of people who are a hell of a lot smarter than you are. And when you do that, you'll succeed. And in fact, the other thing is diversity in the team. And you guys have kind of spoken around that, but diversity is critical, right? If you hire somebody that has the same skills as you, one of you is redundant, right? So having diversity of skills and having people have diverse perspectives is absolutely critical to business. Sorry for that diversion. Funding is the lifeblood of every company, and you have to plan that just as you plan your development. You plan every dollar, where it's going, what it's going for, how you're going to use it. And again, as a founder, every dollar you bring in dilutes your ownership. And so you view that very, very critically and say, how can I be efficient? How can I get there faster? How can I get there more efficiently? How do I get up this learning curve with the fewest number of dollars? Sometimes that means partnerships. Sometimes it means, as you said, like, you know, hiring a team is a more efficient way to do it. Absolutely, go do that. I ended up doing this in several ways. One of the things that was critical to me in my development was to figure out what we weren't going to be. Okay? I knew what we were good at. Knowing what you're not good at is really, really important. So I decided we're going to make a heart valve. I don't want to be a tissue processor. You know, the guys who take bovine pericardium and harvest it and process it, and it's an art form, and there are people that know how to do that, but it takes years to validate those processes. And although it wasn't commercially available, I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to spend the years, the time, the dilution to do that. So I gave away part of the value of my company so I didn't have to do that. And it lowered our risk, and it got us there faster. So it was, I think, a good decision, ultimately, but knowing what you're not good at ends up being a really important part of being efficient.
Krishnan, did you want to comment on that?
No, I agree. And this is something that, you know, we've really learned. You really need to be sure about what you can do and what you don't want to do. That somebody else can do what he can do better, you know, you should farm it out. And I think Peggy's mentioning the engineering team is a good example of that. Instead of trying to hire a bunch of people to do what you knew what we wanted to do, we said we can do this more efficiently, and I think they are doing it. And other examples too. But
by the way, the venture capital industry, especially in our field, is horrific right now. I mean,
yeah.
Funding for startups, I mean, especially A-round funding, is at an all-time low. And I always used to think venture capitalists' job were taking risks, but if you sit down and talk with them, they say, oh no, I can't take that kind of risk. You know, they're early stage, that may not work. And it's like, well, I thought that's your job. But what they do now is, you know, they want to do mezzanine financing rather than this.
Right.
And so a lot of companies are doing more early stage startups, and a lot of angel funding has gone in. But it's a sad state of affairs in venture capital. Part of that is because there was stupid money out there for years that wasn't well spent, and people lost a lot of money for their investors. And so there's probably a third of the venture capital companies have gone under or are just struggling to maintain a small portfolio, but they can't raise funds. And the few that were good are able to raise funds, and they're very active. But it's a very bad time in entrepreneurship for funding, very tough time.
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate those comments. I'm sure our audience has some questions, and so if you want to come up to the microphones, and I think Dory and Rebecca are going to bring those to you, maybe, I guess. And so let me open it up for a couple questions from the audience, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I wanted to touch on something that a previous speaker we had earlier this semester, John Allison, president of the Cato Institute now, discussed in his, mostly referring to the banking system and big business, Fortune 500 type scale phenomena. But he noted that increasingly, a lot of the value that chief executives and upper management appeared to be adding to the giants in industry and banking had to do with their ability to sort of condition, finesse, and mitigate regulatory risk. Not that they could stop it in its tracks, but to have close enough relationships and an understanding of that environment, the threat or the changes that they would have to meet, and especially just in terms of the costs it would impose on their organizations. Getting as much advance warning, preparing, figuring out ways to deal with it as soon as possible. And I was wondering, how is that function, how aware of you, how aware do you feel you have to be of the regulatory environment, which is a moving target in biomedical work? And do you have those functions performed outside of your companies? Do you contract or hire other firms to sort of look out for you at that scale? Thank you.
That's a great question. I think within that is there's a lot of finesse in answering this, maybe. But first of all, I'll refer to something Peggy talked about, which is uncertainty. One of the key elements in venture funding, your whole progress is about uncertainty, and the uncertainty exists at two levels. Uncertainty in, is this going to work? And then uncertainty in, can I prove that it's going to work? Or how well it works, and does it work well enough? And in biomedical, those are tough issues. An example would be if you look at devices that have been developed over the last 10 years for heart failure, there's been one device out of probably, I would guess, $2 billion worth of funded devices that have gone after treating systolic heart failure. One has gotten through the regulatory cycle. It's astounding. So part of this is, so it's that uncertainty too, it's about setting expectations, right? Because part of the value creation is, what do you expect? And so to be able to talk about uncertainty and say, here's how we're going to do this, this is our plan, and this is how we're dealing with the regulators. The biggest regulator, of course, here is the FDA for us. I mean, although things are even more challenging in Europe than they used to be. They're still much more manageable. But like Europe, the U.S. is getting more and more towards a FDA and CMS working together. You guys know CMS is the reimbursement agency, which governs all the Medicare reimbursement, which represents something like 65% of the medical reimbursement in the United States. It's huge. So those two guys now work in concert, so you have to really be able to talk to both the reimbursement side, because it's one. If you get regulatory approval, now you can sell and nobody's going to pay for it, you're in trouble. So you have to plan that effectively. We do this internally. The CEO does get involved, not on a daily basis, but he has relationships at the highest level, and it's part of his job to do that. And but I would say just as critical as that is this whole issue of regulatory strategy. How am I going to negotiate this? Who do I have doing it? What is the process? In what stages? And we could probably spend a whole evening just talking about the complexity of that.
Any other comments, or
I'll
go
just say
right?
that it's a good point that you're bringing up, and when we have presented the gene capture business plan to some people, they'll just say, I just could not handle the risk of getting through the FDA. And so one important strategy for us is to have a revenue line that is not dependent on a regulatory approval. So even though our long-term plan requires FDA certification, we think we can use this technology in food safety and DoD applications and even things like pandemic control before regulatory safety, before regulatory clearance. But that is a very fair question, and when you think about it, you've got a catastrophic failure if you can't get through regulatory. It's a bigger issue for the biomedical side than the biotech side. There are not nearly as many regulatory hurdles on biotech products.
Thank you.
Depending upon whether they're PMAs or 510Ks. 510Ks are pretty straightforward. PMAs take a lot. The other issue is that you go to Europe early. That's kind of the same.